Business or nonprofit. So just about everybody. Okay. So there's an old saying that was developed by the poet Mariel Rueckhouse. And she said that God invented people because he likes stories. And I think we forget something critical when we are introducing a concept or a new business or a new venture or a new product in an old company. And that is that people are psychological rather than logical. And because of that, we like to understand this new idea in the context of the old. So when you're introducing it, there are several different tips and tricks that can really help you to be part of that narrative, to be part of that stream and part of that story. Because if you can't locate yourself in the context of their current thinking, their worldview, empathetically, you're not going to be able to persuade them to come to you. At the same time, if you're not going to be able to use the opportunity to expand their thinking and broaden their horizons, it's also going to fail because it doesn't have the potential to change what is a little bit. So I want to start out with a little bit of a story after a brief commercial. And Steve, we can fly through these slides. We can go through them. So I am the managing partner of the Southern Growth Studio, an innovation and growth strategy firm located here in Memphis. Here's some pictures where we think aloud. We solve fairly complex market problems for Fortune 500 companies, privately held companies, and nonprofits. We have a pretty large client roster. I'm so glad because my children love to eat. And really, it's all about courage. Really, you had to say, what do you really sell? We help our clients take calculated risks, really big leaps in the market, that they understand their market a little better and can afford to make a gamble. So you'll see just some other ways of the way we work. Get out in the field. We have this mix of anthropologists and MBAs, economists, poets, and others that we just bring together in a think tank environment, trying to look at any issue with the biggest frame possible. And that'll be important. Steve, go ahead. List of services which you can find on our website. Keep going. And this is really why we are here, right? What is that? Kevin, do you know? Dairy? So it used to be Piggly Wiggly, but now it's Cash Saver, right? But it's a kind of a small regional grocery store. But what's your first feeling when you see this picture? Okay, what's that?
Clutter.
Clutter. Thank you, Donna. Mary Jane? Andy Warhol. Jimmy, what do you think?
Abundance.
Abundance, right?
Too many choices.
Too many choices. So just hear the words from your peers here. It's too much. And your mind is automatically starting to filter, right? And there are great studies about how we make decisions. So as you're going to tell a story about a new line of business, a new program, a new initiative, a new service, a new innovation, you have to remember that somebody's mind is already on this filter mode where the world is filled with too much stuff. And they're immediately going to try to categorize you if you let them, right? They're looking to label you as soon as possible. But the mind cannot hold that many categories. So Kate, with your permission, we play a game?
Sure.
Tell me your third favorite brand of mustard.
French.
What's your first?
It'd be spicy.
And second?
It'd be honey.
Okay, so you go category, spicy, honey, then name brand, right? But if I ask you your fourth, right, it gets really complex. And that's what these neuromarketers are telling us right now. The mind can only hold three items in any category to make a decision. So keep that in mind. You have to limit the choices you're going to offer. And you have to put them in categories, or you're going to blow somebody's circuits. Again, and you could talk about candles, you could talk about cars, you could talk about bands, you could talk about anything. But if you're going to offer something, you're going to lose your audience if you offer it outside of buckets of three. So you have to categorize for them. There are lots of studies about car sales. And if they put you in a fourth car, they've lost the sale for the day. But if they limit it to 3, there's a good chance that you may put your money down and meet with their manager, so to speak, right, to cut the deal. So, and this is just a small grocery store. It doesn't have nearly the SKU of a large Kroger or something, right? So let's go to the next one. The most important thing you'll learn today is that it's not about the idea, right? So many of us who come up with ideas and new innovations, new products, new services, or we have a new venture, we're an entrepreneur, we think, oh my goodness, right? I've developed the best mousetrap ever. This is a new drug that's going to save the world. But really, it's not about you, and it's not about your idea. Because it doesn't matter if you don't have the power to translate that and make it matter to your audience. So there's a saying, and this saying comes from Annie Dillard, the great writer. And she said, when aiming to cut a piece of wood, you don't cut the piece of wood. You aim for the chopping block. And so just remember, your audience is always the chopping block. They are who and what matters. And that's really the only thing that matters. So Jimmy, we can look at you as a new venture. Let's say if you had to go raise money. A venture capitalist or an angel investor would be a lot different sell than a retailer, right? You would have to turn the story around and you couldn't go with the same story and the same value proposition and the same pitch by any means, because your chopping block is different, and therefore you need to aim differently. Right? They matter. Walk in their shoes. Because then they won't have any shoes, and if you run away, it's harder for them to chase you. All right. So next, and this is really important, this comes from studies in behavioral economics. But what is their frame? So if you do your homework, and you understand what their objectives are, Scott, may I take you as an example? Absolutely. Scott works in innovation at Bayer Consumer Care in R&D, comes up with some amazing products that really work well for consumers that he's been working with. But then he's got to go, and pardon me, correct me if I say anything wrong, he's got to go talk to the people in marketing and in brand and product managers. And so what's the first thing you have to know about those types of people? They've got what? They have short-term goals with budgets tied to it. So anything that disrupts them making that short-term goal, them getting their budget, is seen as a what?
It's an obstacle.
What's that?
It's an obstacle.
I thought you said a monster. That's more accurate. Yeah, it's a monster. Yeah, it's like a foreign object coming to a body. It is just rejected. Right? It is. What did you say, Mike? A threat. So, their frame is that we have certain products we take to market in certain ways, and if he comes out with new ways to sell new products, it's a double threat. Right? It's a double-headed monster in that case. And so you have to understand their frame, and you have to be able to speak it back to them. So think about the world of rhetoric. Someone like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi. They didn't talk in the vernaculars of their world to change the world. Instead, they used the king's English or the nation's English to make their points. You could look at the letter from a Birmingham jail, for example, where he even broke down what law meant and thought about it more deeply than the priests, rabbis, and lawmakers when he talked about natural law, unnatural law. But he was using their rhetoric against them very artfully. He understood their frame, and he was able to reframe it into a deeper context, which would be your objective too. Right? How can you reframe the world of coffee for a venture capitalist? So you know their frame. They've gone to that shelf, and they've gone to some artisan roasteries before. But then what is a new way? You know their frame. What is a new frame? So you have to let them know and earn their trust that you know their world. You know their concerns. You can speak their language. Just say they're worried about annual budgets, market share, headroom, competitors. you have to earn their trust and connect the dots for them. Well, here's the world that you live in right now. But then suddenly, this is the world as a flat, right? The world is there's a bigger world. This is your mental model. This is your worldview. But then you have to earn their trust. See, but that really is not reality. Reality can be much broader, much more expansive, much more generative, much more lucrative, much more of a win-win, much more helpful for people. We can do so much more than we're doing in your mental model, but you first have to establish that bridge of trust by saying, I understand your mental model, I understand your snapshot of the world. I get you, I understand your frame, but here's a frame that's kind of lopsided and weird. It may not fit on a conventional wall, but whoo, it's really exciting. Let's go to the next one. Here's another one too. We forget that people are human. So if you go and you work on a PowerPoint and you start with spreadsheets, you're suddenly stuck in a frame in a current paradigm instead of starting in a different way. Right? So I'm going to give you a demonstration and ask you if this would have been a better way to start this talk. So it was in Chicago. It was in 1961, and there was a 6'5", 260-pound man hanging someone out of a 40-second window from the Sears building. Is that more interesting than saying, well, the poet Mary Rukeyser said? You tell me. Kate is nodding yes. What's your name again?
Lee.
Lee is nodding yes. What's more interesting about it?
Because it's a story and I'm looking to know what happens next.
It's more exciting. See, it creates a picture. It creates a picture. It creates a picture. And I'm going to tell you more about that story in just a second. But there's an old saying in Latin, but it comes from the world of poetics. What does that mean? We have any classic scholars here? You look smart. Oh, you should have gone to second. Middle? Yes, middle. Starting in the middle of things is the literal translation, but you start in the middle, right? So you begin with the action. If you go back and read the classics, if you open the Iliad, it isn't saying, I, Homer, pontificate. No, it starts at the war where there's a problem and somebody's having a crisis. Think of it like a movie opening. We forget that even the most analytical business people are human, right? They're more psychological than logical. If you can talk to them and open that aspect of them. And then suddenly you're dealing not only with their analytical mind, but with their emotions and their heart. And so they make decisions from a different matrix than their sole analytic mind. It's a broader conversation at that point. So remember action. And people are human. Even Stephen Hawking loves a good story, right? And so I've just put a little example that I came up with off the cuff. It may need a comma, I'm not sure. One of you grammarians can tell me. But when I shook his hand, the callus almost cut me. Wow! Suddenly you have a real person, and you wonder about the details of the hand. How did they get the callus? Why are they shaking hands? All this. It starts to paint a story. So with that, I want to actually take a little bit and tell you a little bit of a story that means a lot to me, and then we'll get back into unpacking the story and the lesson. So, that man who was holding that poor victim outside of the window, about to throw him into his death, was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. And the man who was being suspended in midair and thinking about mortality was a client from Sears who had already signed a contract, but then tried to renege on the contract unless my grandfather would pay his country club dues that year. And so my grandfather told people he was with to shut the door, and he changed his perspective very viscerally, very quickly. that may be odd. That's not the way business is done today, or maybe it is in Russia or some other places, maybe in Mississippi, but we're not there. But that seems a little strange unless you take it back and you understand the origins of the story a little more. So my grandfather had built this business after having to drop out of high school to support his mother and two sisters. And he started out working at a pawn shop on Beale Street, and then something odd about all the luggage that was coming in and being pawned just caught his eye, and he started saying, I can fix this for you. And he started making little amendments and adaptations. And then he started actually making the frame of luggage and remaking it. And then he started selling some of his luggage at that pawn shop. And then if you fast forward quite a bit, he had the first private labeled luggage company in the United States with clients such as Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward. They were on President's Island. At their height, they were selling 2.4 million pieces of luggage a week, producing and selling that much. And it's really sad for me to think about because nobody knows where all the money went. But for someone with those kinds of origins who grew up in the Depression, and then to be offered and accepted this great contract, and then to have someone take that moment that was a highlight in his life and try to exploit it. Everything was on the line. What would you do? This was going to create a legacy for the family. Very deep. And so he decided he was going to take a risk. And did. The guy relented, and the contract was approved. So it had a happy ending. I'm glad to say. But I share that with you to get to the next point of storytelling. Steve, you be so kind. You have to have some type of stardust in the story, right? It can't just be facts and figures, or you're going to bludgeon your poor audience to death, right? You have to. Metaphors work. If I could say that you can also personify people. If I could say the man was acting very wolfish, right? Or it tapped something primal, like a bear cub within my grandfather. It begins to color it in a way. And then the next point. So then there's a deep learning. Right? Everyone has these stories. And the whole idea of these stories and the story of your project, of your product, of your venture, goes through what we call the hero's adventure. And so it goes through that whole process. But at the end, the world has to look different than it did in the beginning. Something has to change. Reality needs to be deepened. It needs to be widened. There needs to be a sense of possibility that gets a view for this. Because you go through this whole process, and there are lots of learnings that come across. And it's the job of that learning to offer this boon, this lesson, this moral, whatever it may be, this good. To say if it's a product, maybe it's baked in, as we say. If it's a service, maybe it's you're offering such an experience that it's transformative unto itself. If it's Jimmy, if I may use you an example, if it's a coffee roaster, but yet I don't know much about your business, so correct me if I'm wrong. If it's something that goes and makes a difference to the people in life who are cultivating it, is that correct? How do you take that story and change the lives of those people, but also awaken the heart of the people who are buying it? That's an interesting story to say that, wow, we are 7 billion strong now. Right? That's, all is one. And we're going to remember that every time I drink this coffee. That's pretty profound and pretty shocking. And that's sort of the boon that's baked into your product. This isn't a commercial for his coffee, but it's very good. But what is being conveyed or transformed by those who use your product, who use your service, use your experience. That's really key. So as you go into these things, actually I have 2 cheat sheets here that I'd like to. There's one story about my grandfather here that is, it's over there if you want it, but it's called Entrepreneurs Create Your Own Maps. And the other is the key for compelling storytelling. But in this, you have to ask yourself, am I really going far enough? Do I know my audience? But then the real mirror here is, how do you know that you're on an adventure? And when I say an adventure, it means the risk are high, right? You're willing to risk your life, your career, your livelihood in the same way that my grandfather was. Or you're willing, let's just say it's Scott, and there's a breakthrough for some sufferers whom he's helping. And marketing just won't push it through, but he knows it would make such a difference in life that he's going to decide to make a stand and make a push for it. It's something different. It's something unprecedented. And it's something that you get this feeling, I can't not do this. You have this great inner conviction suddenly. I've got to make a stand here. And so how do you know you're part of this adventure and your story is going to resonate this deeply? It's because there's no map for what you're doing. It's uncharted territory for yourself. It's a little scary. It's off script, right? You have to improvise. And suddenly, the adventure starts, right? And you find yourself mid-action. As a result of that, there might be meetings called that aren't on schedule, right? There may be resistance. And there may be water cooler talk. Wow, why is he so excited about this? And so then how do you package that up, bottle it, and tell it?